I got goosebumps. You know, that's what the actress and activist Laverne Cox said when she heard about a major court decision. It's a pretty strong reaction, right? So what could possibly be so moving?
Well, it all goes back to a high school student named Gavin Grimm. When Gavin was 14, he came out as a transgender young man. For a while, he used the men's restroom at his high school and everything was fine. But then, the school board passed a new rule that forced him to use the women's room or a totally separate single-stall bathroom. Gavin sued, saying it was discrimination, and that lawsuit turned into a 6-year fight that went through 3 different courts before he finally won. His personal story really blew up into a much, much bigger conversation.
And to really get a handle on Gavin's fight and the huge conversation it sparked, we need to get clear on a few foundational ideas. So let's break down 3 key concepts: sex, gender, and identity. You hear these 3 words, sex, gender, and gender identity, thrown around all the time, sometimes as if they all mean the same thing, but they don't. They're actually very different, and getting them straight is the first most important step. Okay, first up, sex. Now this is about biology. It's the physical stuff, your chromosomes, your hormones, your anatomy, both internal and external. It's the label, usually male or female, that a doctor assigns at birth based on those biological features. Next, there's gender, and this is totally different. This isn't about biology, it's about society. Gender is the set of rules, behaviors, and expectations that a culture decides are appropriate for boys and girls or men and women. It's kind of like the social script we're all handed. And finally, we have gender identity. This is the most personal of the 3. It's your own internal, deep-seated sense of who you are, whether you feel like you're a man, a woman, maybe both, or neither. It's what you feel inside, and it's totally separate from your biology or the social roles you're supposed to play. So, if you want to boil it down to a really simple way to remember it, sex is biological, gender is social, and identity is personal. For Gavin Grimm, the biological sex he was assigned at birth didn't match his personal gender identity, and that misalignment is really at the core of this whole conversation. All right, so let's dig into the nature side of this equation first. Let's talk about that biological blueprint. What exactly goes into classifying sex when a baby is born?
What's fascinating here is that it's not just one thing. Biologists actually look at 5 different features. You've got chromosomes, the whole XX or XY thing, then gonads, so ovaries or testes, then you have the dominant hormones, and both the internal and external reproductive parts. Now, usually all 5 of these line up in a way that our society just labels male or female.
But what happens when biology isn't so clear-cut? What happens when you try to force nurture to override nature? Well, the absolutely tragic case of David Reimer, which you might know as the John/Joan case, gives us a really powerful and heartbreaking answer. Just look at this timeline. After a terrible medical accident in infancy, a researcher named John Money convinced David's parents that they could just raise him as a girl. He believed that how you're raised, nurture, could completely determine your gender identity. But he was wrong. It was a disaster. David, who was raised as Joan, was profoundly miserable. He eventually transitioned back to living as a boy, but the trauma and depression from his childhood followed him, and he tragically took his own life. His story is a powerful, painful reminder that our biology can have a deep, unchangeable influence on who we are.
But of course, biology isn't the whole story. Society writes a very, very powerful script for us based on the gender we're seen as. And this is where that nurture part really kicks in.
I mean, think about it. From the second we're born, we're surrounded by these gender roles. All these expectations about how we're supposed to act, think, and feel. We learn them from watching others, from the kinds of toys we're given, and from all the little ways we're rewarded or punished for behaving in the right way for our gender.
And if you think this social script is just some abstract idea, think again. It has very real, very tangible impacts. Take this number, 82 cents. In 2020, here in the US, that's what a woman earned for every single dollar a man earned. That's not just a statistic. That's a direct result of these deep-seated social scripts and biases about who's valued and what roles people should play.
So all of this brings us to where we are today, in the 21st century. And our understanding of all this is really evolving, moving beyond a simple binary either-or way of thinking. We're starting to build a better vocabulary to talk about the huge diversity of human experience.
Okay, so let's get a couple of key terms down because you hear them all the time. First, cisgender.
This just describes someone whose personal gender identity matches the sex they were assigned at birth, and that's most people. Then you have transgender, which describes someone whose gender identity is different from the sex they were assigned at birth, like Gavin Grimm.
And then there's non-binary. This is really an umbrella term for anyone whose gender identity doesn't fit neatly into that strict male or female box. Someone might feel like they're both, or neither, or something else entirely. And this isn't some tiny fringe group. We're talking about over 1 million people in the US alone who identify as non-binary.
Now, if you're wondering why this language, why this understanding is so incredibly important, just look at this chart. This is data from the Trevor Project, and it is staggering. For young people who are gender diverse, simply having the people in their lives respect their pronouns cuts their rate of attempting suicide in half. That isn't a political opinion. That's a public health fact. Social support literally saves lives.
So, let's pull all these threads together. We've defined the terms, we've looked at nature, we've looked at nurture, but what's the big takeaway? Why does any of this actually matter in the real world?
Well, let's do a quick recap. We've established that sex is biological, gender is social, and identity is personal. 3 different things. We've seen how both nature and nurture are incredibly powerful forces in shaping us. And we've seen that for a lot of people, gender just isn't a simple binary.
But here is the most critical reason why this knowledge is so much more than an academic exercise. It's a tool for empathy and for safety. The data shows that transgender and non-binary people are 4 times more likely to be victims of a violent crime than cisgender people are. Understanding is the first step we have to take to start changing that reality.
And that leaves us with one final question to think about. Now that you have this information, how might you, in your own life, your job, your family, your community, help build a world where everyone, no matter their sex, their gender, or their identity, can feel safe and respected?